Hello there, and welcome to a quick session on microtomy and what it's all about. So first of all, we have a microtome. So this microtome is a really quite expensive piece of equipment, not too unlike the bacon slicers you might have in your local supermarket. The only difference is this cuts things a lot thinner than they can manage in the supermarket. So this little baby can actually cut things down to 3 microns, which is 3/1000th of a millimeter thick. So what we're going to be doing today is giving you a brief outline of exactly potentially what this microtome is all about, what the different parts are, what they're used for, and also the basics of taking a section. So that's what we'll be doing. We've got a couple of blocks that we're going to cut sections off today, and we're going to take some nice sections. Right. So the first thing we'll show you is the parts of this microtome. So the important parts of this microtome, what they will do, and also the safety features as well. Before you start doing anything in any workplace, always know what the safety features are of the thing you're using. The potential of having some serious cuts off this piece of machinery is quite high. The chances of you damaging patient material is also quite high as well if you don't follow some simple rules in keeping yourself and indeed the blocks safe. Right. Okay, so this is our microtome. So the parts we are going to be using today are these things here. So this here is a lever that will actually move this blade holder in and out. We're going to use this quite extensively. We're going to be using the wheel on the side here. This will make the head go forward and backwards at a perceived distance. So this one is going to be cutting at 3 microns. The most important feature of this are the safety features. So we have a blade guard. That guard needs to be up at all times when you're changing blocks. When you're actually cutting, the blade guard needs to be down. Otherwise, the actual block itself will not be able to be cut against the blade. So this is the blade holder. So this lever here will actually change the tension on this blade holder here. So the blade will be slotted in here. We'll show you that shortly. The other safety features you definitely need to be aware of are the locks. So we have one on top of the wheel. So this will move if the lock is not in place. If it's in place, it will not move. The other one is a main lock, which again will stop the thing from moving. Right, they're the main safety features of this. Right. So, what else do we need to know? So this little wheel on the side here is for advancing and pulling the head backwards and forwards. So this is kind of a I think if you see the movement of the sticker there, you can see it going backwards and forwards. So this is where the head is able to go backwards and forwards as well. The other thing that we're using is the fine trim or rough trim tool, which will advance the head by a set number of microns, which is going to be more than the 3 microns that that's set at. So the first dot is actually 10 microns. If you push it down further, that's actually 30 microns. Now, when you're cutting at 30 microns, you might not have a lot of control over that piece of tissue in the block. 30 microns might be taking too much tissue off the block in one time, which means that you might end up chunking the block or removing more tissue from the block that you actually need, especially if the piece of tissue within the block is quite small. Other features of the microtome include the cutting angle here, which is set for 5, and the actual adjuster is here. We don't generally move this at all because 5, so this is basically the angle of this particular blade. So we use R35 blades, and for our particular blades, that's set at the optimal elevation. Okay, so another feature we have here is this particular lever, which will, in conjunction with the 2 toggles here and here, will change the orientation of this head. So this is the block holder, and these particular things will either move the block in an up and down motion or in a side to side motion, depending on the actual tissue in the block. So if you've got a really small piece of tissue, if you were to immediately put it into another microtome, it could be that that particular piece of tissue, the facing of it, might not be ideal for the actual setting that you've got it set on at that point. So if you were to take it against the blade, it would remove more tissue than you wanted. That's not something you want to be doing, because loss of tissue, which is massively important in histology, is not a good thing, and it can actually prevent the diagnosis of patients' conditions. Okay, so what other tools might we use for microtomy? Well, we have a variety of different forceps we can use. These 2 here are my weapons of choice. I've had them probably for the last 25 years. You will get used to potentially what you're using. Most people will use a pair of these curly forceps for pretty much everything they need to do with microtomy. Another good tool is a blade. Some people remove the sections from the blade with their fingers. That's not recommended, so it's always probably best to have a nice brush, preferably with bristles on it. I've seen some brushes before where they've got 1 or 2 hairs left on the brush and it's still being used effectively by the person who's actually using it. But a brush with a few hairs on it is generally a good idea. And then the other piece of equipment that you will definitely need is a water bath. So this water bath is set to 43 degrees in this case, which is just slightly less than the melting temperature of the wax, which for our purposes is about 56 degrees. So 56 degrees, our wax will be in a molten state. The main idea of the water bath is to float the sections out on. So when you float the sections out, all the creases will come out of the tissue, and hopefully you'll get a decent section within a matrix of wax, which you're then able to pick up with a slide. So let's show you how we do it. So when you first get your blocks, once they've been embedded, you'll notice that you've got pieces of tissue surrounded by a matrix of wax, hopefully all at relatively the same plane in the block. And again, you'll get this with multiple different blocks. And these particular 2 blocks are appendix, and we will try and take some nice sections off these now. Okay, so the first thing that you'll want to do is put a blade into your microtome. Please make sure your lock is on, and then blades wise, like I say, we use R35s in this case. They come in a blade holder. The first thing you want to do though is wipe off any grease and oils that the blades have got on them that they come with. that will mean that your first sections don't get stuck to that stickiness. So the blade holder, the blade guard, sorry, needs to come down. You need to release the blade holder here and put your blade in. So till you actually start cutting, that blade holder needs to go back up again. Right, so the first thing we need to do is rough in our blocks. So what we'll do is we'll take our block and we'll put it into the blade holder. Okay, so it can go into the blade holder in that direction. If you've got a piece of tissue that is difficult to cut, potentially you could turn it round and cut it like that as well. Some pieces of tissue have a grain going through them, and cutting with that grain helps you to get a better section. In this case, we'll just cut it as we would normally. So the first thing we need to do is remove the extra wax that is on top of the tissue here. And we do this by removing the blade guard and then moving. So I'm using the wheel here to start with until we're just at the face of the tissue, and then potentially we can use the rough trim lever here. So this at the moment is pushing the head 10 microns into the tissue, and as we do it, more of the wax from the surface of the block is being removed. We need to do this until we have a full face within the block that is no longer covered with wax. Please take the time to keep the area clean. If there's too much of a buildup of wax whilst you're doing this, it can make it very, very difficult. So check the block frequently to make sure that you've got a full face. So what you need is, in this case, because these are tubular structures, if you think of your appendix as being almost like your finger, and what we've done is we've chopped bits through it like this. So what we're expecting is these tubular features is what we're after to be completely exposed by the blade. Now I can see with this particular one at the moment, it's probably going to be difficult to see with that camera. This one and this one are through. This piece of tissue is through as well, but this piece of tissue has got this area here which is still yet to be uncovered. So what we do is we put it back into the block holder, again remove the blade guard, and again take some more tissue off the block until all parts are exposed. At this stage you can actually have a look at the block and see whether or not, just by turning that handle, that you're going to get a full face section. If at this point you realize that some parts of this particular block will not be exposed, probably for a long time, then you might need to take that back to the embedding station to be re-embedded. So again, this is the point at which you can assess that particular block for depth. Okay, to me this seems as if it is almost there now, so there's a slight little bit still that needs a little bit more. So again, we'll put it back into the block holder and take a little bit more off. Again, you don't want to be turning this handle too quickly. If you turn the handle at a high rate of knots, then basically you haven't got any control over this particular piece of tissue. Okay. So at the moment that is going to be okay. What we need to do now is put that on a ice tray. Okay, so what we need to do next is take some sections off these blocks. So the one that's been on the ice the longest will be ready to look at. So what we need to do is put your block, as you would before, into the block holder. This will be already trimmed in, so you won't need to do much in the way of refacing of this block to start getting a section. As you note here, as it's going through the particular block, I haven't moved this particular blade along from trimming. We're getting a nice line going through the tissue here, and also here, and also here. So these are potentially score lines that would go through the tissue. So what we will do is we will move the blade holder along to a fresh piece of blade, and then we will resume taking the sections. So what we need to take is our forceps, blowing gently on the section. Will help you to take a ribbon. This can then be released using the brush and put onto our water bath. We'll take another couple. Please take out the block when it's not being used. You might need to go back to that block. If you're cutting levels off it, for example, you might need to make sure that that's actually cooled down again before you take the next section. Our attention now is moved to the water bath. Okay, so we have some sections on the water bath here, and some of them won't be any good. This one here is missing part of the section. This one here looks quite a good section, as does this one. If the actual maybe extra cuts and things that are around the tissue don't actually enter the tissue, then they potentially could be used as well. The other ribbon we took, this one over here, again, this top one is no good because it's got a blemish or a fold within the actual tissue itself. But again, this piece here could be taken. What we need to do now is separate these sections. To separate your sections on the water bath, so the water bath, its use is to spread the tissue out, to make sure all of the creases within the tissue come out. So hopefully by now that's actually done that job. So what we need to do is make sure we've got a really nice clean pair of forceps. It does help that they are quite cold, so sometimes you can rub them on the ice, as I'm doing here. And then when we come to actually go back to the sections, a basic dissection motion will separate the tissue. Again, keep your forceps clean between each attempt at separating. I think these should have been separated a bit earlier because they're starting to get a little bit sticky because they've been allowed to heat up on the water bath. Okay, so the next step would be to take a section. So we use a nice clean slide. We enter the water bath at a slight angle and pull up out of the tissue, out of the water with the tissue on it. So to take a section off the water bath, we put a nice clean slide into the water at an angle by the tissue, and then pull the tissue out onto the surface of the slide. These are then left to drain. Now you can either drain these upright, we leave them on the side of the water bath here, and you can actually drain them vertically as well. It's important that we don't have any water or bubbles underneath the section, because that can disrupt the tissue and make them look not correct. Just to show you why that was a particularly bad section, you can see here that folded bit at the top of the section, which would mean this particular section is not able to be used. And again, this one here, you can see there is a nice fold of tissue going all the way through the bit of appendix there at the bottom, which again means that that particular tissue is disrupted, which would again make diagnosis from that quite difficult. So the next thing we need to do is put a label onto the slides that we've made. It is important when labeling your slides that the label is appropriately placed onto the slide like so, so that there's no overlaps. So this would have the patient's identifying number on it, and if you can see, it's not overlapping on any of the sides. So when this slide goes to our slide scanning equipment, it will not cause any issues. These are then placed in a rack. And once filled, this rack will then go onto our staining machine for H&E staining. So thanks very much for joining me on the basics of microtomy, how to, in effect, set your microtome up, how to get a piece of tissue onto a water bath, and then how to take a section from that water bath. It is very much the basics. You learn a lot of this job whilst doing it. Every piece of tissue is different. Every particular block can behave in a slightly different way. Never be afraid to ask for help if you're having trouble. There will be people probably with lots of years more experience than you have that can give you little hints and tips and things like that that will help you on your journey to become an excellent histologist. All the best to you. Take care. Bye-bye.